All right, domestic still life slideshow. I'm going to run through some of these and talk a little bit about what they are, what I mean by that, and hopefully it'll help you out. So if you've had me in Photo One, if you've had anybody in Photo One, we've done a still life assignment. So domestic still life, what does that really mean? Is it just some like crazy bullshit made up thing? Maybe. So we're looking at making a still life where the objects they're not solely a formal relationship, they're also in some way evocative of the place they are found, but they're found somewhere. They are in a place, but that place they're not in a factory, they're not in a warehouse, they're not in an anonymous completely like blank sterile studio space, right? They're in some kind of domestic environment, and that domestic environment can and should inform how we read them. So I'm going to run through some folks. Again, slideshow is up on the website under slideshows. Take a look. So Victor Schrager, he makes these beautiful, really, really shallow depth of field great formal relationship images using books. Right, again, books. Now, I anticipate a bunch of you are going to bitch about color. Yes, these are in color. Yes, this assignment for you is in black and white. But the final project, you can still do the tethered thing and have it be in color. So if you're like, ooh, keep that in mind. Again, super beautiful. They're kind of Rothko, great colors, kind of soft. There's a subtlety to them. John Chervinsky, he's interesting. He makes these images using sort of everyday stuff. This is a fluorescent light tube. Don't do this, kind of dangerous. But then he's also drawing on them, right? So he's coming out of this academic background where he's working with like chalkboards and sort of notation and what does that mean and like what is the information that's being conveyed. Another one here, you can actually see the materiality of the chalkboard a little bit more. There's this interesting connection between drawing and the photograph, and the photograph is being drawn on a little bit, or the objects are being drawn on a little bit. This is another one where there's this sort of like painting of this clock that's in there. I don't expect and probably would advise against you going out and making a painting and putting it into your still life. But the way that sort of flat thing and the 3D things intervene, and again, the real precision with how he is laying stuff out in the frame. Again, some oranges. The way that there's sort of this ambiguity of, what the frame is. Are you seeing through it? All this stuff, this little moment where that orange is flying overhead. Fantastic. And just to go back to this, I'm sure that orange is on a string, not really flying. Katharine Parker, or Parker Almanas. These are interesting. They feel very bodily or visceral, or there's like a gooiness to these two images that I find kind of gross. But it's interesting, right? It's there's a sort of femininity to it that I think is interesting. Light is beautiful, right? Super, super important, right? Light plays such a big role in still life. Kimberly Witham, more traditional, kind of vaguely romantic still life. Right, she's doing these with, you see the drapery, the lighting, sort of this beautiful side lighting, the wood, the materiality, right, the color, the way things are arranged on these plates, and dead squirrel, dead owl, dead raccoon, it's interesting to think about the difference in the drapery here versus here, right? This one, because it hits both the top and bottom of the frame, feels very much like it's pulling back onto a scene beyond, which, I mean, it literally is. Whereas this one, that curtain is within the space of the picture instead of being in front of it. Woodchuck. I mean, these juxtapositions that she's creating, the sort of like beauty and romance, and then death, right? Sort of still life, nature moored. Andrej, man, I'm going to not try his name because I'm going to screw it up. He is someone, if you had me in 153, I think I showed you his work. He makes these still lives that are about sort of agribusiness, and so these are titled, you can see the title down at the bottom, 4539 USA, 4555 USA, 4072 USA. Those are the codes on the produce, country of origin, and then a specific code. If we went to the grocery store anymore, you could go check those out. But again, he, like the previous artist, is working with this language of a classical still life, with this big window light, with this very sort of delicate modeling, with this very deep, rich black background behind it. The materials, right? Glass, silver, linens, wood, right? There's sort of a contrast between the perceived quasi-artificiality of agribusiness, of the way that food is produced and brought to us, and both the still life as a genre, and then also the sort of like way it's set up, the materials that are in it, which feel more natural, homespun, etc. Right, very complicated the way that he's set up. We have multiple layers of these draperies going back. The light is very carefully controlled, what it's falling on, right, what it's avoiding, having it flagged so that it doesn't fall on that backdrop. But again, I mean, he's shooting these in a space that is smaller than a garage, right? Crafting this light so that it appears to be a beam coming down there. I don't know what the fuck this stone is. Don't go buy a stone. And then again, right, this sort of like fun contrast between the sort of like 1700s-ness of the way the thing is set up, and then this plastic bag, this shrink-wrapped, whatever the fuck that is. Annette Kelm. These are, I think, maybe more in the realm of what we're working with. Right, she's sort of making these things in her house using the stuff that she has on hand. So FedEx box, whatever this weird thing is, some sort of backdrop, some sort of plant. But again, look how she's paying attention to the relationship between the objects, to the patterns in the space, having that backdrop. Oops, I guess my light died. Having that backdrop be plain, having it key into the shape of this chair or whatever that is, having the beats and this vessel coordinate. Right, again, you're like, oh, look at this crazy backdrop, except that it's like blue paper or something taped on the wall. Katharine Parker. She is someone who feels very related to Laura Latinsky, who we'll look at in a sec. Again, these objects, they're things you eat. It's unclear who has been here, who was or will be eating them, what has happened in this space. There's sort of a luxuriousness of the materials, right? There's a specificity of how she's constructing this space that I think is really good, right? Again, this window light coming in, the sort of clue of the window with this window frame back there, this sort of high-low of this thing that looks like linen but is paper napkin. Again here, this like sort of butcher paper running across, like up, down, across, down, cascading into this space where the light is very beautiful. This little shape right there being highlighted against these lighter colors and then, or lighter tones, and then the darkness of the woodwork. Again, following the light coming in, these things being wrapped, right? The contrast of these fabrics. Starts to get a little obscene. I don't know what's going on there. Right, but again, very simple but very beautiful. There's an elegance and sort of an airiness to them that I think is really nice. Berthe Piontek. So I linked to her on the website, and I've included some images here. Sorry, I'm checking my timer because I have bread rising upstairs, because that's what we do now, is we apparently, sit around fucking baking bread. She has a bunch of images. They're all very good, but they're not all necessarily related to what we're doing. So I love this image. I think it's really beautiful. The framing, the balance, aesthetically and literally, in the composition, the blackness of whatever that liquid is, just like the drama of this, like almost tipping, but not quite. Gorgeous. Here too, right, we have this delicacy, domesticity, of this fine china wrapped in this nylon hose. It's really, really great. The thing that I think is missing a little bit in these images is that they are very simple, right? There is not a lot going on. And I think, and I mentioned this on the website, I think that in her bodies of work, and go onto her website, look at them, I think that's less relevant because she is juxtaposing these with other stuff, right? She is including these, then there's portraits, there are other images, right? So there is a greater complexity in some of the other images, and these still life images are a moment of sort of rest for the viewer. This one maybe is an exception, right? This complexity of the two pictures obscuring each other, the lilacs, which are a traditional kind of mourning, not as in time of day, but as in death thing. They themselves are kind of wilting, and they are obscuring these old pictures of someone or some people. Sue Palmerstone. So I have a couple of her images here. Great sort of color, great arrangement, the formality of it. The thing that I love are these beautiful little moments, like these cars up here, or this string here, or this like completely implausible measuring tape, the flowers peeking in, this thing on the wall in the background framed just perfectly. I think it's important to look at how carefully she does everything, because what you don't want to do is just like walk into a room and be like, it's messy, therefore art, and like take some shitty picture. That bad, no. I wondered about not including her at all, because right, there is a the aesthetic has a casualness to it, but everything is very, very precisely done, right? Like that is exactly where she wants it to be. This foot, that color, like the relationship of all of these things around this outlet, right? Where the bananas are, the color of this, how the strings lie, like all of it very, very intentional. Laura Latinsky is maybe the sort of word domestic still life. She makes these pictures that seem like we're walking in on the aftermath of some kind of party, right? It's all very big and light and airy and white in all senses. And then there's some sort of like collapse or destruction or post thing, sort of waste that's left behind. Again, beautifully laid out. There is a moment of thinking it could be just casual happenstance, and then you're like, no, there's no way somebody just like walks out of the party leaving their apple sitting perched perfectly on the edge of this table. The color is great. Lighting, again, where the emphasis falls, very soft again. And you don't have to have very soft light, right? You can make a still life and have very sort of angular, hard light that's describing places and pieces and planes and whatever. But I'm gonna turn off my notifications before some crazy shit happens. Oh my god. More Laura Latinsky, you know, this sort of like incongruity of this Tootsie Pop with this cantaloupe. The planes, right? The way that the camera is positioned, the way that space kind of falls away. Here, right, the precariousness, a lot of precariousness going on in this fucking Laura Latinsky shit. Right, things are on edges, they're about to fall off. They're not, but they're about to, right? What do we got? Like, we've got this cap over here is about to fall off. This is sort of bridging the space. This plate's falling off. Like, you know, people go into Laura Latinsky's house and just leave shit everywhere. Again, so simple, right? But really beautiful. The light, incredibly precise. The placement of this bottle cap in the lower right, very, very intentional. This sort of slight of the frame, right? Not accidental. Again, with the fucking shit on the edges of stuff, you know? Come on, Laura Latinsky. There's this beautiful moment where something had been here and has been removed, and all we see are these crumbs, you know, like things within things. Thinking about, I mean, one of the things that I think is really important is when we're working with these domestic spaces, being aware of clutter, right? Being aware of how can I reduce the complexity of this frame so that I just have these objects in the space, right? Can I have a background to this foreground? Octopus. Oysters. I kind of find these later darker ones a little bit less, I say later, they're later in the slideshow. I don't know where they are in her career. A little bit less successful. Maybe the reproductions that I have just aren't as good. If you go onto her website, it is super uneven as far as the image quality. Jan Gruber. So Jan Gruber has a great name. These are some slides I stole from Brad Paris. They're beautiful. Very historical process with this sort of like lovely brown tone. You know, looks very classical still life, except you're like, well, there's a little tiny dog, and this pear looks like it's wearing a hat. So there's sort of like him breaking rules a little bit in a way that I think is interesting. You know, again, like where things are, what's behind them, the blackness behind this white flower, like the way these things are positioned just so, this like knife or whatever that is coming in. Scale, depth of field. Zeke Berman. Zeke Berman's a little bit more complicated as far as the construction. He, unlike Laura Latinsky, does not make things which could be seen as stuff you just walked in on, right? You're not going to walk in and be like, oh, look, I see the party guests left the silly string all over. So precise, but working with stuff that you can imagine him like having in a garage. I'm going to go back to this, like canes, forks, string. This again, right? More string, wire, jar, fish tank. This one's so pretty. There's something about the like tape on that vessel and this sort of hand reaching in. I mean, you know, whatever extension of the hand, this wire or whatever, reaching in and tipping it. And the glass, the light coming through, the way that the light sort of radiates out this direction, opposite from the direction that the liquid feels like it's going, even though the liquid is actually flat. It's the glass is tipping. Very beautiful. Here again, right, sort of using newspaper to make this shape on the floor that's relating to this other wooden volume. Very clever. This one's great, right? You can imagine like this as a big print and the sort of strangeness of what the fuck is happening here, right? So going into this space, putting all of these things, being very precise about where they are. This reminds me a little bit of someone named John Fall, if you have a chance to look him up, P-F-A-H-L. Okay. So those are some sample domestic still life people. This slideshow is up, obviously, on the website, so take a look at it. If you want to walk through it, if you have questions, obviously hit me up. Again, we're looking for precision in arrangement. We're looking for formal rigor. We're looking for a space that is not a sort of like pristine studio, right? It's a space that people occupy. These objects are, to a degree, our read of them is informed by our understanding of the space, right? And yet the space is not, it's not an environmental portrait of some stuff, right? The stuff is in a space, but the space is still very Spartan. It's still pulled back, stripped down. There is very much a background to the foreground of the objects. But yeah, it's interesting. I think it's a good candidate for tethering. I think it is a good candidate for doing something where you don't have a lot of other people. And I think it's a real opportunity to sort of try and be creative and play around with the stuff that you do have around you on a relatively smaller scale, and to work with lighting in a way that is more precise. Right. So with these very small spaces, you're really going to be working more, I think, on cutting down on the light, controlling the light, blocking the light. If you have one big window, what else are you adding back in? But yeah, look forward to seeing what you got going on, and holler at me with any questions.